Well, I'm actually going to be talking about biodiversity and not people as a botanist. But it's just interesting looking at how effective stewardship has been in conserving threatened plants in the province. Too long. Okay, so KwaZulu-Natal's got over 5,000 plant taxa, that's species and subspecies, which is roughly a quarter of South Africa's flora. Over 400 species of these are endemic, and of these, over 250 are threatened. And 111 of these threatened taxa are endemic to KZN. So we obviously have quite a large proportion of the flora that we really do owe some protection to because they don't occur anywhere else, and they're already under a lot of trouble from transformation and alien invasion and so on. So we had a quick look at how many threatened plant species there are in biodiversity stewardship sites. The first problem is that a large number of the biodiversity sites have never had a very thorough botanical survey. So these figures are huge underestimates, and I think when we get around to doing surveys, they'll go up dramatically. We've got 2 and quite likely 3 critically endangered species out of 20 on biodiversity sites. The third with a question mark is one that's been seen on one of the sites by a very reputable botanist, but when we went back to verify it, they hadn't burnt that grassland, so we couldn't find it. But we will have another look this year, which makes up between 10 and 15% of our critically endangered plant species. We've got at least 20% of the threatened of the endangered plant species, and I think well over 15% of the vulnerable species. And these figures include sites that have been proclaimed and that are about to be proclaimed. As an example, I wanted to talk about the Hilton daisy, because when I started looking at these plant species, we've actually been spectacularly successful in conserving this. It only occurs in mist-belt grassland, and it's endemic to the eastern part of South Africa, but it's a flagship species for mist-belt grassland. So conserving the Hilton daisy is actually going to carry a lot of other species, some of which we don't even know about, with it. Incidentally, most of these sites weren't conserved for Hilton daisies. They were conserved for furry, feathery things like oribee and blue swallows and wattled crane. Shut up, Kevin. It's classified as endangered by using the IUCN criteria, mainly due to habitat destruction and fragmentation, which, as we all know, is rife in the mist-belt Midlands. And until the stewardship program, there were only 2 populations formally conserved. And I must apologize in my abstract, I forgot about Blinkwater, which has got 5 clones or 5 different plants on it. So these are in Queen Elizabeth Park at the KZN headquarters and KZN Wildlife headquarters and in the Blinkwater Reserve. But on came stewardship. And we now have in proclaimed stewardship sites or sites that are very close to being proclaimed, as Greg explained, or sites that are under distribution. The mist-belt grassland goes in quite a narrow longitudinal band up the province. From Roselands in the south, which is the southernmost distribution, up to Taker's Kloof in the north. So we've gone from 2 protected to 7, which is quite considerable. And these conservation sites will help to protect the genetic variation along its distribution, as I said. It also means that one of the largest populations at Lake Merthley near Greytown will be conserved. And there's also an entirely yellow-coloured Hilton daisy up at Takers Kloof in Northern Natal, which is a stewardship site under negotiation. Having got these plants in biodiversity stewardship sites, we then need to look after them, and in the management plans, which are essential and legal obligation for stewardship nature reserves, we do emphasize conservation management a lot, and we do devote space to special species requirements. This is a page out of the management plan for Wildlands Nature Reserve, and there is a page, and I'm sorry it's not very clear, but there is a page devoted to Hilton daisies, burning, grazing, something about the pollinators, exactly where they are on the property, and a couple of other things about not picking them because KZN wildlife might get angry. But landowners generally are very enthusiastic about having threatened plant populations on their property, and they actually become very protective of them. And these particular landowners have offered to put a fence up around the daisy colony and only let the cattle in during winter when they can't do any damage. So it's very encouraging that landowners become quite actively involved in conserving threatened species on their property, and they actually brag about it. We can't monitor all of the special species on the stewardship sites, but what we are doing is monitoring forbs, which for you non-botanists are non-grass species, what we call the flowering plant, what a lot of you would call the flowers, although grass plants do have flowers. And we think it's very important that the management plans that we recommend are not impacting on the diversity, the biodiversity at stewardship sites, but we've obviously got to monitor this. And the way that we're doing this, particularly in the grasslands, is we carry out diversity monitoring on selected stewardship sites in order to establish the condition of the grasslands and to give us a baseline for long-term monitoring. And that's just to show that the stewardship manager doesn't just sit behind a desk, but comes out in the field with us and gets actively involved, even though it looks like some of the facilitators were doing harder work there. Within each site, we select representative plots, and we use a modified method that Rob Scott Shaw developed, that we have altered slightly and we may alter yet again. And so far we've done plots at quite a few biodiversity stewardship sites: Roseland, Boston View, Fort Nottingham, Bull Barnes, Michael House, Takers Kloof and Lake Merthley, sometimes in very adverse weather conditions, as that photograph shows, although this is a very unclear projector. And having established these baseline diversity indices, what we're planning to do is resample these sites at approximately 5-year intervals so that we can see whether there's been any marked change in forb diversity. You certainly wouldn't pick it up in less than 5 years. And if there is a change and we need to change management recommendations, we can do this during the meetings with the landowners, which are held on an annual basis. That was a very short talk, so a lot of the questions that people had for previous speakers can probably come now. Thank you.